Is the Panasonic G7 worth it in 2020? Let's check it out. So I've recommended this camera to at least 3 different people within the last 6 months. And I started thinking to myself, you know, this camera has been around since 2015, but yet it's still being sold by just about every major camera store out there, including Amazon. And so I figured there's probably a lot of people wondering, is this camera still worth buying in 2020? And so I thought I'd make a video going over some of the pros as well as the cons, and also kind of give you guys some examples of how I use this camera to hopefully help you guys determine whether or not this camera is worth it to you. So to start off with some of the pros, the first thing that I can think of is the price. Now this camera is usually between $450 and $500, and depending on who you buy it from or what time of year you buy it, you can usually get it with a bunch of accessories. Sometimes you can get it with a 14 to 140 in addition to the 14 to 42 millimeter kit lens that it comes with. You can get it with tripods, SD cards, batteries, external microphones, all kinds of different stuff, which makes this camera pretty hard to beat for its price. So this camera is a 4K camera that can produce a pretty decent image. It does 4K at 30 frames per second, 24 frames per second, and if you need a little bit of slow-mo, you can drop it down to 1080 and get 60 frames per second. So it's very capable when it comes to video resolutions. It's also got an external microphone jack, and that is something that's kind of hard to find in this price range. And that's usually because the manufacturers leave those out, so that way you have to go up to the next tier if that's something that's important to you. So to me, it is very important to be able to record audio, say through a microphone that you want to put on top of the camera, or if you're using an external recorder but you want to also get that into the camera and be able to bypass the internal microphones on the camera, which most internal microphones are horrible. The next thing is that this camera is the Micro Four Thirds system, which has been out for some time, which means there's a whole bunch of lens options out there. Panasonic makes lenses for it, the Olympus makes lenses for it, Sigma. There's a whole bunch of third-party manufacturers out there that make lenses for the Micro Four Thirds system, and you can also adapt a lot of lenses to it as well. So you've got tons of options out there, and the lenses are usually fairly cheap because of the fact that it's a Micro Four Thirds system means the sensor is smaller, which means they don't need as much glass to be able to get the image to that sensor, and that's the most expensive part of lenses. And so you can usually buy lenses out there fairly cheap, and there's a ton of used lenses out there as well for these cameras. So that's a huge plus. The next thing on this camera is that it's got a flip screen. That is a very cool feature that even some of the more high-end cameras that are coming out today don't have. Like my Panasonic S1, for instance. It doesn't have a flip screen. It has an articulating screen, but not a flip screen. And a lot of people complained about that. Because if you're, say, a person that films yourself, you put it on a tripod, or you're going to be vlogging with this camera, then it's very important to be able to see what's on the screen and make sure that, you know, you're in frame, you're not overexposed, you're in focus, all of those things. And the fact that it's touchscreen means that while you're looking at it, you can be able to control all those things. You can tilt it to get low shots, things like that. And you can also flip it around like that to be able to protect your camera when you put it away in your bag and stuff like that, and not scratch up your screen. Which, speaking of putting it in a bag, is very easy to do with this camera because of the fact that it's so small. It's a very lightweight camera, so it fits just about anywhere, and it's not going to fatigue you from having to carry around tons of heavy equipment and things like that. I mean, you can pack this camera and 4 or 5 lenses in a very small bag and carry it all day and not really get tired of carrying it. It's also got a very cool app. Like if you look right now, I'm using the app for my Panasonic S1 to be able to, control all the parameters on my camera. And it's very similar to the app that comes on this. And so that you can use the app is a very important feature, because if, say, you are recording yourself You can set focus, you can change all your exposure values, your ISO, your white balance. You can change everything and be able to set your image all from the app and be able to see what the camera is doing. And it also goes along very well with the menu system on this camera. The menu system is very easy to use, very easy to navigate through. It's not confusing at all, and it is also very configurable. So just about every button on this camera you can program to do whatever custom feature you want to do. So if there's something that you use fairly regularly, rather than having to go through the menu every time to do that, you can assign it to a button and be able to do it right away. And so that is a very convenient thing. And also, since it is a lightweight camera, it will fit on most gimbals without a problem. Most gimbals are priced based on their payload capacity, and so you can get a fairly small gimbal that can handle this camera no problem and not have to spend a ton of money on it. So you've got that as well. And then also, because it's a Panasonic, its color science works well with other Panasonic cameras. Like I usually use this with my G7, my G85, and my S1 anytime I have to do multi-angle shots. I used it recently for a music video. I used it for a concert scene. I use it for interviews all the time. Anytime I have to do any kind of multi-angle shots, that's what I use this camera for. It's usually my C camera. I'll use my G85, my G7, and my Panasonic S1 to get those multi-angle shots. And because it's Panasonic, it works well with the colors of all the Panasonic cameras. And so I'm able to match all those shots and be able to get a good quality video as an end result. And so, you can buy a couple of these cameras at $500 a piece and be able to set yourself up a whole multi-angle shot for fairly inexpensive, a lot less than what it would cost for most other cameras. So very, very capable camera. But to go over some of the cons, because it's a micro four thirds system, it's not very good in low light. And this particular camera, if you go up too high on the ISO, it starts to get very grainy. You'll see a lot of noise in your footage. I usually won't go over about 1600 ISO on this if I don't have to. It's not super bad in low light. There are other cameras out there that are worse, but it's not the greatest because of the fact that it's micro four thirds. You have a smaller sensor, so you're not going to get the low light capabilities that you would out of a full frame sensor or even an APS-C sensor for that matter. And that also makes a difference on what lens you're using. Like this camera, the kit lens is a 14-42. Honestly, I don't really use the kit lens on this camera. If I had to, I would. It's not that it's super bad, but it is a very slow lens. It's a 3.5 to 5.6 f-stop, which means it's not going to open up very wide and not going to allow that much light in. And the fact that it's micro four thirds also means that it's got a 2x crop. So compared to a full frame sensor, like this lens is a 14-42, because it crops in 2x on that image, this is actually a 28-84 millimeter lens. And so you have to start thinking differently in the way that you set up your shots and you organize your shots in with the lenses that you're using in order to get the same kind of shot that you would on a full frame sensor. Now, for me, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, I've kind of just, you adapt to it, you learn how to use it. Lots of people love the micro four thirds system, and I really believe that the micro four thirds system is far from going away anytime soon, because it is very capable. And so, the 2x crop is kind of a bummer, but it's not a deal breaker in my opinion. And so the other thing about the G7 is the fact that it's got no stabilization. There's no in-body stabilization on this at all. You can get lenses that are stabilized, but the camera itself doesn't have any kind of IBIS, like say the G85. The IBIS on this is awesome. This camera, and I mean the IBIS on this in my opinion is actually better than my Panasonic S1 for handheld stuff. I can run around with this handheld and I know my footage is going to come out fairly smooth and I don't have to worry about it. So if handheld is something that's important to you, or low light is something that's important to you, maybe this camera is not for you. The battery life is not so great on this camera either. It's not the worst. It takes the same size batteries as the G85, but the G85, for whatever reason, the batteries last longer, even though that camera's doing a little bit more. So I guess they just improved its efficiency. But the battery life is not the worst. It's not like some of the older Sonys and stuff like that where you're constantly changing batteries. But it's not the greatest either. Like on my S1, I'll go through about 2 batteries, maybe 2.5 in the amount of time that I'll go through one battery on my Panasonic S1. But batteries are also cheap for this thing. My S1 batteries are $100 a piece. You can buy 2 for $15-20 with a charger for this thing because they've been around so long and there's so many of them available. And so battery life is kind of a negative, but it's not a huge thing. The next thing is that it's got a 30-minute record limit. So if recording longer than 30 minutes is important to you, then this may not be the camera for you. Although there are some ways to bypass that. I've seen some stuff on the internet that you can do some kind of workarounds within the menu system to get it to release that in 4K only, not in 1080. But you know, it is limited to 30 minutes at a time. And that 30 minutes is also broken up into little files. They're all sequential, so they're not super hard to organize, but you do have a bunch of files to work with versus like the G85 and the S1, you know, that's just one file from start to stop. And so that is a little bit of a downside. But myself, I don't ever really, you know, record over 30 minutes. Very rarely. I mean, I'm usually, you know, short bursts of stuff, a couple minutes at a time, and then piecing something together. 30 minutes is a long time to record. But again, if the record time is something that is important to you, then this may not be the camera for you as well. That's pretty much it. If you guys have any kind of questions or comments, let me know down in the comment section. If you did find this helpful, please hit that thumbs up. Let me know, are you gonna buy this camera? Do you think that it's worth it in 2020? And also, if you are not subscribed to this channel, I ask you please hit that subscribe button down below and hit that bell for notifications, and so you'll be notified of new videos. And until then, I will see you on the next one.